The storm didn't stop for mercy. Snow buried the road, the wind screamed through the trees, and in the middle of it all, a black German shepherd stood in front of a dying mother and 3 unborn lives, refusing to move, even as his own blood froze into the ground. One man opened his door that night, thinking he was saving 2 broken dogs. He had no idea the choice would change everything. What happens next will make you believe in quiet miracles and second chances for the forgotten. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. And if you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope. Flagstaff, Arizona, sat high on the Colorado Plateau like a city that had learned to endure rather than resist. At over 7,000 feet above sea level, it was no stranger to cold, but what arrived that night was not ordinary winter. The storm came down from the San Francisco peaks without warning, swallowing the sky in heavy, swirling white, erasing roads, rooftops, and the thin line between wilderness and town. Snow did not fall gently. It struck sideways, driven by wind sharp enough to sting exposed skin like broken glass. Streetlights glowed faintly through the blizzard, halos of yellow trembling against the dark, while the pine forests surrounding the city groaned under the weight of ice. This was not the kind of storm people prepared for. It was the kind that found you. Beyond the last row of houses, where asphalt surrendered to frozen dirt and forest paths, 2 figures moved slowly through the whiteout. The first was a large German shepherd, black-coated, broad-chested, his silhouette unmistakable, even through the snow. His name was Ronan. He was nearly 4 years old, built lean rather than bulky, the kind of dog shaped by discipline rather than comfort. His ears stood upright despite the wind, torn slightly at the edges from old injuries. One of his hind legs dragged subtly with each step, and dark blood had soaked into the thick fur along his left flank, already crusting with ice. His breath came out in rough, visible bursts, each exhale labored, each inhale a conscious effort. Behind him walked Alara. She was also a German shepherd, lighter in color, her coat a muted gold washed pale by snow. Her movements were slower, uneven, her belly heavy with pregnancy, hanging low enough that it brushed the snow when she stumbled. Alara was younger than Ronan, perhaps 3 years old, with softer eyes and a face that still carried traces of gentleness despite exhaustion. Her ribs showed faintly beneath her fur, and her breathing was shallow, accompanied by a wet rasp that spoke of sickness long ignored. She should not have been out in a storm like this. She should not have been walking at all. Ronan knew that, and yet he kept moving. He placed his body deliberately between Alara and the wind, adjusting his path with small, precise shifts, taking the brunt of each gust so she did not have to. When she slowed, he slowed. When she stumbled, he stopped, turning his head just enough to check her without breaking formation. This was not instinct alone. It was learned behavior, reinforced over years of commands, punishments, and expectations. Ronan had been trained to guard, to position himself, to endure. He did not question orders. He adapted. The city lights ahead were not a promise of safety. They were simply the last option left. Ronan had once trusted humans. He had trusted hands that clipped leashes onto his collar, voices that gave commands, boots that paced behind him. That trust had been stripped away piece by piece, by chains pulled too tight, by nights locked in concrete kennels, by the sound of other dogs screaming in nearby cages. Alara had been there then too. She had been quieter, quicker to flinch, quicker to obey. When her cough began, no one treated it. When her belly grew heavy, she was moved, isolated, watched more closely. They had escaped only because the gate was left unlatched during a storm, not unlike this one. Ronan did not run blindly when freedom opened. He took Alara with him. Now, the storm pressed harder, the temperature dropping fast. Alara's legs buckled, and she sank into the snow with a low sound that barely carried over the wind. Ronan stopped instantly, standing over her, his body rigid. He lowered his head and nudged her shoulder once, firmly, not gently. It was not comfort. It was instruction. She tried to rise and failed. For the first time since leaving the forest edge, Ronan lifted his head and looked toward the houses. At the far end of the road, set slightly apart from the others, stood a single-story wooden house with a low, sloping roof. A single porch light glowed, steady and unblinking. Tracks in the snow suggested someone still lived there, fresh enough, deliberate. Ronan made a decision. He turned, repositioned himself once more in front of Alara, and began guiding her toward that light. Inside that house lived Nathan Cole. Nathan was 63 years old, tall but stooped, his posture shaped by decades of habit rather than age alone. His shoulders were still broad, though the strength there had settled into something quieter, heavier. His face was sharply angled, with a prominent nose and deep-set gray eyes that rarely softened. A trimmed beard, more gray than brown now, framed a mouth that had learned restraint the hard way. His hair, once dark, was cut short and practical, thinning at the crown, untouched by vanity. He dressed the same way every day, flannel shirt, worn jeans, boots by the door, clothes chosen for use, not comfort. Nathan had been a police officer for over 30 years. He believed in procedure, in doing things the right way, in arriving on time. The night his son died, he arrived 3 minutes too late. That failure changed everything. His wife, Sarah, had unraveled more slowly. Sarah had been a slender woman, tall and soft-spoken, with chestnut hair she wore pulled back in a loose knot, and skin that freckled easily in the sun. She laughed quietly, preferred old books and long walks, and believed stubbornly that people were mostly good if given the chance. Cancer took her over 2 years, piece by piece, until Nathan learned that some things could not be arrested, questioned, or fixed. When she died, the house became too quiet. Nathan turned the volume of life down until it barely existed. On this night, he stood by the living room window, staring out at the storm with a mug of untouched coffee cooling in his hand. The power flickered once, then steadied. He had already checked the locks, already secured the generator. He did not expect company. Then he saw movement. At first he thought it was a trick of light, branches bending under snow, shadows shifting. Then the shape separated itself from the white. A dog, large, black, standing unnaturally still in the storm. Nathan leaned closer to the glass, wiping condensation away with the back of his hand. The dog did not run when the light shifted. It did not lower its head. It stood its ground, ears forward, posture alert despite obvious injury. And behind it, barely visible, another shape, lower to the ground. "Jesus," Nathan muttered. He reached for his coat instinctively, then stopped. His hand hovered, uncertain. The rules he lived by were simple. Don't get involved. Don't invite chaos back in. Don't reopen doors that took years to close. Outside, the black dog turned slightly, angling his body against the wind. That movement, controlled and intentional, sent a familiar chill through Nathan's chest. That wasn't a stray. That was a working dog. Nathan felt the old weight settle into his bones, the same one that used to settle before answering calls no one else wanted. He exhaled slowly, set the mug down, and watched as the lighter-colored dog behind the black one collapsed into the snow. The black dog did not flee. He stepped forward once, placing himself squarely between the fallen dog and the house, and let out a single sharp bark. Not pleading, not aggressive, commanding. Nathan stood there for a long moment, the storm screaming outside, the past pressing in from all sides. Then he moved. He reached for the door. Nathan Cole did not rush when his hand closed around the door handle. He stood there for a moment, feeling the cold seep through the wood, listening to the storm batter the siding, like something alive and impatient. The house creaked softly, an old structure responding to pressure the way old bones did. For years, Nathan had lived by routine, lock the doors before dark, check the windows twice, keep the world at a manageable distance. Opening that door now felt less like a simple action and more like a violation of a long-standing truce he had made with his own grief. He pulled the door open. The wind slammed into him instantly, sharp and unforgiving, stealing his breath. Snow swirled into the entryway, dusting the wooden floor, melting almost immediately against the warmth inside. The black German shepherd stood no more than 10 feet away, illuminated by the porch light. Up close, the dog was larger than Nathan had expected. Tall at the shoulder, long-legged, his frame lean but powerful, the kind of build that spoke of endurance rather than brute strength. Ice clung to the fur along his muzzle and chest, and one eye bore a faint scar that pulled the lid down slightly, giving him a perpetually intense, asymmetrical gaze. The dog did not move when the door opened. He simply watched. Nathan raised his hands slowly, palms open, the way he had done countless times with armed suspects and frightened witnesses alike. "Easy," he said, his voice steady but quiet, pitched to carry without challenging. The word was habit, muscle memory. He had spoken it to men shaking with adrenaline, to his son when nightmares woke him at 3 in the morning, to Sarah in hospital rooms thick with antiseptic and fear. Behind the black dog, the lighter female lay partially buried in snow. She tried to lift her head and failed, releasing a wet, rattling cough that cut through the wind like something broken. The sound tightened something in Nathan's chest that had nothing to do with sympathy and everything to do with recognition. He knew that sound. He had heard it in people who waited too long to ask for help. The black dog shifted then, just once, angling his body slightly so Nathan had a clear view of the female. It was not an accident. It was an introduction. "All right," Nathan murmured, more to himself than to them. "I see you." He stepped back into the house, keeping the door wide open. The heat spilled out in a visible wave, steam curling where it met the cold. He reached for a flashlight by the door and flicked it on, angling the beam low and steady. "Come on," he said. "Slow." The dog hesitated for half a second, then moved. He limped forward, each step careful, deliberate. When he reached the threshold, he stopped again, turning his head just enough to look back at the female. Nathan understood the hesitation immediately. Trust was not given freely by creatures that had learned what hands could do. Nathan stepped forward into the storm. The cold hit him hard, but he ignored it, focusing instead on the female. Up close, she was smaller than the male, but still substantial, her coat matted and dull beneath the snow. Her belly was unmistakably swollen, her sides heaving with shallow breaths. Nathan crouched slowly, keeping his movements visible, and spoke softly. "I'm going to help you up," he said. Though he knew words meant little, tone mattered more. The black dog, Ronan, though Nathan did not know his name yet, watched every movement with razor focus. His ears were forward, his weight shifted subtly onto his good leg, ready to intervene if Nathan misstepped. Nathan respected that. He had spent a career reading posture, knowing when someone was preparing to act. Nathan slid his hands beneath the female's chest and hindquarters, bracing himself. She was heavier than she looked, her weight uneven and awkward with pregnancy. She whined softly but did not resist. As Nathan lifted, she sagged against him, her body trembling, her breath hot and damp against his sleeve. "Got you," he muttered through clenched teeth as he carried her inside. The black dog followed immediately, crossing the threshold without hesitation now. He paused just long enough to shake snow from his coat, then positioned himself between Nathan and the open door, watching the storm as if daring it to follow them inside. Nathan laid the female down on an old blanket near the heater, kneeling beside her to assess what he could. Her eyes were clouded with exhaustion, her gums pale. He pressed 2 fingers lightly to her side, counting breaths, then frowned. This was bad. Not just the cold, not just the pregnancy. He straightened and glanced at the male. "You did good," he said quietly. The dog's ears twitched, but he did not relax. Nathan closed the door, sealing the storm outside. The sudden silence was almost shocking, broken only by the low hum of the heater and the female's labored breathing. Snow melted into small puddles on the floor, darkening the wood. Nathan removed his coat and boots, then moved with purpose. He fetched more blankets, a shallow bowl of water, and a clean towel. As he worked, he was acutely aware of the dog's gaze following him, not hostile, evaluating. "Name's Nathan," he said after a moment, glancing toward the male. "You can remember that if you want." The dog did not respond, but his posture shifted slightly, the tension in his shoulders easing just a fraction. He limped over to the female and lay down beside her, pressing his body against hers to share what warmth he had left. His breathing was uneven now, and up close Nathan could see the damage more clearly. A deep gash along the left flank, edges jagged and old, reopened by strain. Smaller scars along the neck where a collar or chain had once bitten too deep. This dog had not been a pet. Nathan fetched his first aid kit from the hallway closet, the same kit he had carried versions of in his patrol car for decades. As he knelt again, the dog growled low in his chest, not aggressive, but firm, a warning. "I won't touch you," Nathan said calmly. "Not unless you tell me to." The growl faded. The dog held Nathan's gaze for a long moment, then lowered his head, resting his chin on the floor but keeping his eyes open. Permission, conditional, and fragile. Nathan turned his attention back to the female. Her breathing hitched again, and she shifted restlessly, a soft whine escaping her throat. Nathan recognized the signs with a slow, sinking certainty. This was not just illness. Labor was close. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the small house, time narrowed. Nathan sat back on his heels, rubbing his hands together to warm them, mind racing through possibilities. He had no veterinarian nearby, no cell service reliable enough to call for help in this weather. Whatever happened next would happen here. He looked at the two dogs, the male standing watch. Despite his injuries, the female fighting to breathe, carrying lives she might not live to see, and felt something inside him shift. Not hope, not yet. Something heavier, responsibility. "Okay," he said quietly to the room. "We'll take it one step at a time." The male dog lifted his head slightly, eyes meeting Nathan's. For the first time since Nathan had opened the door, there was something else there beneath the vigilance. Not trust, but recognition. As the heater hummed and the storm pressed on the walls, the line between past and present blurred. Nathan thought of Sarah's hand in his during the worst nights, of his son's laugh echoing through his always that no longer heard it. He had closed the door on all of that, believing distance would dull the pain. Now, with two broken creatures breathing beside him, he understood something he had refused to face for years. Some doors, once opened, could not be closed again, and maybe they were never meant to be. The house settled into a wary stillness after the door closed, the kind of quiet that did not mean peace, but pause. Outside, the storm continued to batter Flagstaff with undiminished fury, wind scraping ice against the siding, snow piling high against the windows until the glass looked frosted from the outside in. Inside, warmth crept slowly through the rooms, carried by the steady hum of the heater and the faint smell of melting snow and wet fur. Nathan Cole moved through the space with deliberate care, conscious of every sound he made, every step on the wooden floor, as if the night itself were listening. Ronan lay beside Alara near the heater, his body curved protectively around hers. Up close, the toll the storm and their flight had taken on him was impossible to ignore. His black coat, once glossy, was dull and stiff with ice-melted blood. The muscles along his shoulders still held strength, but there was a tremor beneath it, a fatigue that no amount of discipline could hide. He watched Nathan with one unblinking eye, the other half-lidded by an old scar. This was a dog who had learned that vigilance did not end just because the immediate danger had passed. Alara shifted slightly, releasing another shallow cough. It rattled deep in her chest, a sound that did not belong to a healthy animal. Nathan knelt again, careful to keep his hands visible, and placed two fingers lightly against her ribs. He counted her breaths, frowning as he felt the uneven rhythm. Her flanks barely rose, and when they did, it seemed to cost her more than it should. He had seen this before, in humans and animals alike, lungs working against themselves, the body rationing air. "Easy," he murmured, though the word was more for his own nerves than for her. Nathan stood and crossed the room to the kitchen, filling a kettle with water. He set it on the stove, turning the burner low. As he worked, he took stock of the house the way he always did when something went wrong. It was modest, sparsely furnished, the kind of place that reflected a man who valued function over comfort. Photographs lined one wall, old patrol photos, a faded picture of Sarah standing beside a trail sign in the mountains, her smile soft, her eyes bright. Nathan avoided looking at them tonight. He did not need reminders of what he had lost. He needed focus. When the kettle began to steam, he poured warm water into a shallow bowl and carried it back, setting it a careful distance from Alara's head. She did not drink immediately, but after a moment she lifted her muzzle and lapped at it weakly. Ronan watched her closely, nose nearly touching hers, his body rigid. Nathan noticed how Ronan adjusted his position each time Alara moved, shifting his weight to keep her steady, to block the draft that crept along the floor. It was not affection in the way people like to imagine it. It was duty, ingrained and absolute. Nathan returned to the hallway and opened a cabinet he rarely touched. Inside sat an old emergency radio, its plastic casing yellowed with age. He turned it on, adjusting the dial until he caught a weather update. The voice crackled through static, calm and distant. Warning of continued whiteout conditions and impassable roads. No emergency services would be reaching this part of town tonight. That knowledge settled heavily in his chest. Whatever happened, they were on their own. He glanced at the clock, just past midnight. As if summoned by the thought of time passing, Alara whined softly, her body tensing. Nathan stiffened, moving closer again. He did not touch her, but he could see the change, the way her muscles drew tight, the subtle shift in her posture. He had delivered babies before, long ago, in back seats and on kitchen floors, waiting for ambulances that never arrived in time. This felt uncomfortably familiar. Not yet, he muttered. Not tonight. Ronan lifted his head, ears angling forward. He let out a low sound, barely audible, a vibration, in his chest rather than a growl. Nathan met his gaze and held it. I know, he said quietly. I see it. A knock sounded at the door. It was faint, almost lost beneath the wind, but Nathan heard it. His head snapped up, heart hammering once before he forced himself to breathe. He moved toward the door, every sense alert. Through the small window, he saw a hunched figure wrapped in a heavy coat, snow clinging to her shoulders. He opened the door a crack. Ruth? Ruth Alvarez stood on the porch, stamping snow from her boots. She was in her late 70s, short and sturdy, her gray hair tucked beneath a knitted hat. Her face was lined deeply, the lines of a woman who had lived a hard life without complaint. Ruth had been Nathan's neighbor for over a decade, a retired veterinary technician who had spent her youth working ranch calls across northern Arizona. She carried herself with quiet competence, her dark eyes sharp despite her age. I saw the light, she said, her voice roughened by years of cold mornings and cigarette smoke she had given up long ago. And I heard something. Didn't sound right. Nathan hesitated only a second before opening the door wider. I've got 2 dogs inside, he said. One's pregnant, the other's hurt. Ruth nodded once, already stepping past him. Show me. She took in the scene with a practiced glance, moving closer to Alara without hesitation. Ronan rose halfway, tension flaring, but Ruth did not react. She knelt slowly, hands resting on her thighs, letting the dog see her, smell her. Hey there, she said softly. Easy, big guy. I'm not here to take anything from you. Ronan studied her, then settled back down, though his eyes never left her face. Ruth examined Alara without touching at first, watching her breathing, the rise and fall of her sides. She's in bad shape, she said quietly. Lungs sound wrong. How long's she been coughing? Long enough, Nathan replied. Ruth nodded. Labor's coming, maybe not tonight, but soon. She looked at Nathan then, really looked at him, her gaze assessing. You ready for that? No, Nathan said honestly. But I'm here. That'll have to do, Ruth said. She stood, joints cracking softly, and brushed snow from her coat. I've got some antibiotics and fluids at my place. Old stock, but it'll help her breathe a little easier. Won't fix everything. Anything helps, Nathan said. Ruth paused at the door. You did the right thing, she said, her voice gentler now. Opening it. Nathan did not answer. He watched her disappear back into the storm, the door closing once more behind her. The house felt smaller after that, more fragile. He returned to Alara and Ronan, sitting on the floor a short distance away, his back against the wall. He did not crowd them. He simply stayed. Hours passed in slow increments. The storm outside began to lose its edge, the wind easing, the snowfall lightening. Alara's breathing remained strained, but steady. Ronan did not sleep. Neither did Nathan. As the first hint of gray touched the windows, Nathan felt the weight of the night settle into his bones. He had crossed a line he could not uncross. Whatever the dawn brought, birth, loss, or something in between, this house would never return to what it had been. He looked at the 2 dogs beside the heater, at the quiet determination etched into Ronan's posture, at Alara's exhausted, stubborn will to keep breathing, and understood with sudden clarity that this night was only the beginning. Dawn did not arrive the way it usually did in Flagstaff, quietly easing light over the pines and rooftops. It crept in reluctantly, a thin gray presence pressing against the frost-coated windows, as if unsure it was welcome after the violence of the storm. The snow outside had softened into uneven drifts, scarred by wind and silence, the world holding its breath in the aftermath. Inside Nathan Cole's house, time had narrowed to a single room, a single circle of warmth near the heater, where life and death negotiated their terms. Alara's condition shifted just after first light. It was not sudden, but it was unmistakable. Her breathing, which had been shallow and strained through the night, changed rhythm. Each inhale came with effort, each exhale drawn out longer than before, as if she were rationing air. Her body tightened in slow waves, muscles pulling inward, releasing, then pulling again. A low sound escaped her throat, not a cry but a vibration of pain and resolve, ancient and instinctive. Ronan rose immediately. Despite the gash along his flank and the stiffness in his hind leg, he moved with purpose, circling Alara once before positioning himself beside her head. He did not pace or whine. He pressed his shoulder lightly against her neck, grounding her, his presence steady. Up close, Nathan could see how Ronan had aged beyond his years. The dog was not old, perhaps 4, but his face carried the gravity of endurance, of lessons learned the hard way. His muzzle was dusted with gray where stress had worn the black thin. His eyes, amber and sharp, never left Alara's face. Nathan knelt across from them, sleeves rolled up, hands steady, despite the quiet storm building in his chest. He had prepared as best he could through the night, clean towels laid out, warm water ready, Ruth's antibiotics waiting on the counter. Ruth herself had returned briefly before dawn, delivering fluids and instructions in her gravelly, no-nonsense voice, then leaving again, before the roads became impassable for good. "She won't make it easy," she had said, "and she may not make it at all, but the pups might." Nathan did not forget those words. Alara's body tensed again, harder this time. Her head lifted, then fell back against Ronan's chest. He lowered his muzzle to her ear and let out a low, steady sound, something between a hum and a breath. Nathan had never heard a dog make that sound before. It was not learned. It was something deeper. "All right," Nathan said softly. "I'm here." The first contraction came and passed without result. Alara shuddered, her sides heaving, her breath breaking into short gasps. Nathan wiped her brow with a warm cloth, careful not to crowd her. He had learned long ago that panic helped no one. Presence did. Minutes stretched. Then, with a deeper, full-bodied effort, Alara bore down again. The first pup arrived quietly, sliding into the towel in Nathan's hands, slick and dark, its small body trembling as it took its first breath. Nathan worked quickly, clearing the sack, rubbing the tiny chest until a thin, high sound cut through the room. A cry. Alive. Ronan's ears flicked forward. He leaned closer, eyes softening just a fraction, as Alara turned her head and licked the pup weakly, once, twice, memorizing the scent. There was no time to rest. The second pup followed within minutes, lighter in color, its movements slower but determined. Nathan assisted where he could, his hands sure, his mind narrowed to task. Alara trembled violently now, her strength draining with each contraction. Her breathing grew harsher, a wet crackle deep in her lungs that made Nathan's jaw tighten. "Easy," he whispered, "just a little longer." The third pup took longer. Alara cried out then, a sound sharp and raw, and Ronan answered with a single bark, not loud, but urgent. Nathan moved closer, bracing her gently. When the final pup emerged, smaller than the others, Nathan felt a surge, of relief so sharp it almost hurt. 3. All breathing, all alive. Alara sagged. Her head fell sideways, resting against the floor, her eyes half-lidded. Her chest rose once, twice, then stuttered. Nathan was at her side instantly, listening, watching, his training screaming warnings he could no longer ignore. Her breaths were too shallow, too slow. The illness Ruth had warned about was no longer a background threat. It had stepped forward to claim its due. "Alara," Nathan said, though he knew she did not understand the words, "stay with me." She did not respond. Ronan froze. For the first time since Nathan had met him, the dog did not move to adjust or guard or position. He stared at Alara's face, his body rigid, as if movement itself might break something irreparable. Alara's eyes opened briefly, unfocused but searching. They found Ronan. In that look was no fear, only completion. She lifted her muzzle just enough to touch his, a faint brush of noses, then released one, long, shuddering breath. It left her body and did not return. The room went impossibly still. Nathan felt it before he confirmed it, the subtle absence that followed the final breath. He pressed his fingers to Alara's side, already knowing the truth. Her heart had stopped. Ronan made a sound then, not a howl, not a whine, a low, broken exhale that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his chest. He nudged Alara once, gently, then again, harder. When she did not move, he lowered his head beside hers and stayed there, unmoving. Nathan sat back on his heels, the weight of the moment settling over him like the storm had hours earlier. He had seen death many times, but this was different. This was a life spent entirely in service of something else, ending the moment that service was complete. He reached for a blanket and covered Alara carefully, leaving her head and neck exposed. He did not rush Ronan. He did not speak. Some moments demanded silence. The pups stirred, their small bodies wriggling against one another for warmth. Ronan lifted his head slowly, eyes red-rimmed but clear. He looked at the pups, then back at Alara, then finally at Nathan. The message was unmistakable. She was gone. They were not. Nathan nodded once. "I've got them," he said quietly. "I swear it." Ronan lowered himself beside the pups, curling his body around them with the same precision he had once used to shield Alara from the storm. He began to lick them, clumsy at first, then more certain, his movements driven by instinct sharpened by loss. Nathan remained where he was, watching the scene unfold, his chest tight with a grief that was not entirely his own. Outside, the light strengthened, pale sun reflecting off snow, indifferent to the lives it illuminated. Alara had come this far to give her children a chance, and now the night had taken her, but it had given something else in return. The morning after Alara's death did not feel like a morning at all. It arrived without ceremony, a thin wash of pale light sliding across the floorboards and stopping short of the small circle of warmth near the heater. Outside, the storm had spent itself. Snow lay heavy and quiet, pressed flat by cold, the world reduced to white and gray and the occasional dark spine of a pine. Inside Nathan Cole's house, the air was thick with the aftermath of the night. Warm milk, antiseptic, wet fur, and something else harder to name. Loss had a scent of its own, and once noticed, it lingered. Ronan did not leave Alara's side for a long time. He lay with his body curved around her still form, his chin resting near her neck, his breathing slow and measured. The gash along his flank had reopened during the night, the fur there dark and tacky, but he ignored it. Pain was familiar. Absence was not. Each time one of the pups squeaked, he lifted his head slightly, checking, then settled again, his eyes never quite closing. He was not guarding Alara anymore. He was keeping vigil. Nathan moved quietly, giving the dog space. He gathered the towels used during the birth, rinsed them, hung them over chairs to dry. He washed his hands and face, scrubbing until the hot water stung, as if that might rinse the memory from his skin. It did not. When he returned to the room, he stopped just inside the doorway, taking in the scene again, as though the shape of it might change if he looked away long enough. Alara lay where she had fallen, her coat already cooling beneath the blanket Nathan had placed over her. In the dim light, she looked peaceful, her body finally at rest after weeks, perhaps months, of carrying a burden she had not been allowed to shed. Nathan felt a familiar tightening in his chest. He had seen this before, in hospital rooms and quiet bedrooms where machines had gone silent. He had told himself then that grief was something to endure, something that dulled with time. He knew now that was only half true. Grief did not dull. It rearranged. The pups huddled together between Ronan's forelegs, three small bodies pressed into a knot of warmth and instinct. They were blind, their ears still sealed, their movements uncoordinated and earnest. One was darker than the others, nearly black, its tiny paws flailing as it sought heat. Another carried Alara's lighter coloring, its muzzle pale against the dark blanket. The third was the smallest, its ribs visible beneath thin fur, its breathing quick but determined. They were hours old and already working hard at staying alive. Nathan knelt a few feet away and watched Ronan lick them, slow and deliberate. It was not graceful. Ronan's movements were careful, almost uncertain, as if he were following instructions he had never been given. He nudged the smallest pup closer to the others, then adjusted his body again to block the draft creeping along the floor. It was the same behavior he had used with Alara, transferred without hesitation. The duty remained, only the shape of it had changed. "You're doing it," Nathan said quietly, though he did not know if the dog understood the words. "You're doing fine." Ronan did not look up, but his tail shifted once against the floor, a small movement that might have been acknowledgement or might have been nothing at all. Nathan stood and went to the kitchen, setting about preparing the milk replacer Ruth had left. His hands moved automatically, the steps familiar from a lifetime of procedural work. Measure, warm, test. He had learned long ago that the body could function even when the mind resisted. When the milk was ready, he returned and sat on the floor, careful to keep his movements slow and predictable. Ronan's head lifted immediately, eyes narrowing. Nathan held the bottle up, letting the dog see it, smell it. "They need this," he said simply, "just for now." There was a moment, longer than comfort allowed, where Ronan did not move. Then he shifted back slightly, creating space without fully withdrawing. Permission, again, conditional and fragile. Nathan fed the pups one by one, his large hands awkward with the tiny bottle. The smallest pup struggled at first, its mouth searching blindly, then latched on and sucked with surprising strength. Nathan felt a strange, sharp pressure behind his eyes and forced himself to breathe through it. He had fed his son like this once, long ago, pacing the living room at 3 in the morning, Sarah asleep on the couch, her hair falling loose around her face. The memory hit him without warning, vivid and unkind. He finished feeding them and set the bottle aside, then turned his attention back to Ronan. "I need to move her," he said softly, nodding toward Alara. "Not far, just not here." Ronan stiffened, a low sound building in his chest. "I won't take her away," Nathan added quickly. "I promise." The dog's gaze flicked to Alara, then back, to Nathan. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then Ronan rose slowly, stepping away just enough to allow Nathan access. He remained close, muscles taut, ready to intervene if Nathan broke his word. Nathan wrapped Alara carefully, lifting her with more effort than he had expected. She was lighter than she should have been, her illness having taken its toll long before the night's end. He carried her into the spare room at the back of the house, a small space that held little more than a bed and a dresser. He laid her down gently, smoothing the blanket over her one last time. He did not linger. Some goodbyes did not benefit from words. When he returned, Ronan had settled again with the pups, his body forming a living wall between them and the rest of the room. Nathan sank down against the wall opposite them, exhaustion finally claiming its due. He closed his eyes for a moment, then another, letting the quiet wash over him. A knock sounded at the door. Nathan opened his eyes, heart jumping before reason caught up. He stood and crossed the room, peering through the window. Ruth Alvarez stood on the porch again, bundled against the cold, a canvas bag slung over her shoulder. "You didn't call," she said when he opened the door. Her gaze went past him immediately, taking in the room. She did not ask questions she already knew the answers to. She stepped inside, set the bag down, and nodded once toward the spare room. "I'm sorry." "Me too," Nathan said. Ruth crouched near the pups, her movements economical, her face softening just a fraction. "They're strong," she observed. "That's something." She glanced at Ronan, then back at Nathan. "He'll need help, not just food, rest, time." Nathan nodded. "So will I." Ruth huffed a short laugh. "You always did learn slow." She straightened, rolling her shoulders. "I can come by the next few days, check the pups, show you how to handle them without driving yourself crazy." "I do appreciate that," Nathan said. Ruth studied him for a moment longer, her eyes sharp but kind. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "You know that." "I know," Nathan replied, "but I am." Ruth accepted that with a nod. She left supplies, instructions written in blocky handwriting, then departed as quietly as she had come, leaving the house fuller than before, despite the absence it carried. The day wore on. Nathan fed the pups again, cleaned what needed cleaning, tended Ronan's wound when the dog finally allowed it, pressing gauze against torn skin, while Ronan endured in silence. In the afternoon, sunlight crept further into the room, warming the floor where the pups slept, their small bodies rising and falling in uneven rhythm. As evening approached, Nathan stood at the window and watched the light fade. He felt the weight of the house around him, the permanence of what had happened settling in. Alara was gone. Nothing would change that, but 3 lives remained, fragile and insistent, and a dog who had lost everything except his sense of duty. Nathan turned back to the room. Ronan looked up at him, eyes steady, questioning. "I'm here," Nathan said, more firmly now. "I'm not going anywhere." Ronan did not move closer. He did not need to. He lay back down with the pups, the line of his body relaxed for the first time since the storm. Night fell again, quieter this time, and in the stillness, something new took shape. Not hope, not yet, but the shape of responsibility shared. 3 days passed after Alara's death, and the house began to settle into a fragile rhythm. Not peace, nothing so generous, but routine, the kind born out of necessity. Snow still lined the edges of the road, pushed into dirty banks by plows that had finally reached the outskirts of Flagstaff, but the sky had cleared into a hard, unforgiving blue. Cold remained, sharp and dry, but the storm's fury had moved on, leaving behind the quiet aftermath that made every sound feel louder than it should. Nathan Cole woke early each morning now, not because he wanted to, but because the pups demanded it. Their cries were thin, insistent, cutting through sleep with the urgency of hunger. He learned their sounds quickly, the sharper cry of the smallest one, the impatient squeal of the darkest, the breathy insistence of the pale one. He fed them, cleaned them, weighed them with a kitchen scale borrowed from Ruth, recording numbers on a scrap of paper taped to the refrigerator. Progress, however small, mattered. Ronan watched everything. His wound had begun to close, the skin knitting slowly beneath careful bandaging, but he still favored the leg. He moved less than before, conserving energy, positioning himself where he could see the door, the windows, the pups all at once. His grief had not vanished. It had hardened, compressed into something quieter and more dangerous. Ronan did not whine for Alara. He did not search the house for her. He simply accepted the absence as fact and adjusted his duty accordingly. That adjustment included Nathan. Ronan tolerated him now, not with warmth, but with recognition. When Nathan moved toward the pups, Ronan's eyes followed, sharp and assessing, but the tension no longer spiked the way it had. Trust was not granted, it was earned incrementally, through consistency and restraint. On the third afternoon, the sound of tires on gravel cut through the quiet. Nathan was at the kitchen counter, preparing the next feeding, when Ronan's head snapped up, his ears angled forward, his body going rigid in a way Nathan recognized immediately. This was not curiosity. This was alert. Nathan wiped his hands on a towel and moved toward the window. A dark pickup truck had pulled up near the edge of the property, its tires crunching over frozen gravel. The vehicle was older, a heavy-duty model with a dented front fender and mud caked along the sides despite the snow. It idled loudly, unnecessarily so, as if announcing its presence were part of the intention. The driver's door opened. The man who stepped out was tall and broad, his frame thick rather than athletic, built by excess rather than discipline. He wore a heavy canvas jacket unzipped at the front, revealing a stained hoodie beneath. His beard was unkempt, dark with streaks of gray, his hair cropped short but uneven, as if cut without care. His face was weathered, but not by honest work, by anger, drink, and the slow erosion of consequence avoided too many times. His eyes scanned the property with proprietary ease. Ronan rose silently. The man took a few steps forward, boots crunching, and stopped when he saw the dog standing in the window. A slow smile spread across his face, curling at the edges like something rehearsed. "There you are," he muttered, loud enough for Nathan to hear through the glass. Nathan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. He opened the door and stepped onto the porch, closing it behind him. He did not invite the man inside. His posture was neutral, hands loose at his sides, feet planted squarely. Years of police work had taught him the value of stance long before words were exchanged. "Can I help you?" Nathan asked. The man snorted, spitting into the snow. "Depends," he said. His voice was rough, edged with mockery. "You got something that belongs to me." Nathan's gaze did not flick toward Ronan. "You're on private property." The man laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Relax, I'm not here to rob you." He tilted his head, studying Nathan now. "Name's Marcus Hale." The name meant nothing to Nathan, but the way Marcus said it, like it should, set his teeth on edge. "I'm looking for my dog," Marcus continued. "Black Shepherd. Female, too, though she's probably useless by now." His eyes drifted toward the house. "He's valuable, trained, worth a lot more than whatever charity case you think you're running." Nathan felt the words land, each one calculated to provoke. He kept his voice level. "You don't own him." Marcus's smile thinned. "Funny thing about that," he said. "I do." Behind the door, Ronan let out a low growl. It was not loud, but it carried, vibrating through the wood. Marcus's eyes flicked toward the sound, interest sharpening. "There it is," Marcus said softly. "Hear that? That's my investment." Nathan took a step forward, closing the distance just enough to reassert the boundary. "There are pups in this house," he said, "and their mother is dead." Something shifted in Marcus's expression, not surprise, but irritation. "Figures," he muttered. "She was always weak." The growl deepened. Nathan's jaw tightened. "You should leave." Marcus's eyes returned to Nathan, cold now. "I don't think so." He folded his arms, the gesture broad and confrontational. "You don't know what you're dealing with. That dog wasn't some stray you picked up. He's trained to fight, to guard, to obey. You think you're doing him a favor keeping him locked up here with milk bottles and blankets?" Nathan heard the truth woven through the lies. "You hurt them," he said quietly. Marcus shrugged. "I had trained them. The words sat between them, heavy and ugly. Nathan thought of Alara's breathing, of the way Ronan had held himself between her and the storm, of the pups rooting blindly for warmth. He thought of Sarah, of his son, of all the times someone had decided ownership outweighed care. "You need to leave," Nathan said again. "Now!" Marcus stared at him for a long moment, then smiled, slow and unpleasant. "I'll be back," he said, "with paperwork, with authority. You can do this the easy way or the hard way." He turned and walked back to the truck, climbing in without another word. The engine roared to life, louder than necessary, and the truck rolled away, tires spinning briefly on the ice before catching. Nathan did not move until the sound faded. When he turned back inside, Ronan was standing near the door, body taut, eyes bright with something fierce and unyielding. Nathan met his gaze and nodded once. "I won't let him take you," Nathan said. "Any of you." Ronan held the look for a long moment, then stepped away from the door and returned to the pups, settling beside them. The message was clear. The threat had been named, and it would not be ignored. The day after Marcus Hale came to the house, Nathan Cole did not sleep much. He lay on the couch with his boots still on, the old habit returning without permission, listening to the sounds of the house, as if it were a perimeter he needed to memorize all over again. The ticking of the clock in the kitchen, the low hum of the heater cycling on and off, the soft, irregular squeaks of the pups as they shifted in their sleep. Ronan lay between the couch and the door, his body angled so that one eye faced Nathan and the other faced the windows. It was not accidental positioning, it was strategy. Morning arrived sharp and bright, sunlight bouncing hard off the snow and filling the room with a glare that made everything feel exposed. Nathan rose slowly, joints stiff, mind already moving through contingencies. Marcus's words replayed themselves with irritating clarity. Paperwork. Authority. The easy way or the hard way. Nathan had spent too many years wearing a badge not to hear the threat beneath the phrasing. He fed the pups, cleaned them, then stepped outside for the first time since Marcus's visit. The air was brutally cold, dry enough to sting the lungs. He walked the perimeter of the property, boots crunching in the snow, scanning tire tracks, disturbed patches of gravel. Marcus had not returned overnight, but Nathan knew better than to assume anything had ended just because the noise had stopped. When he came back inside, Ronan watched him closely as he shrugged off his coat. The dog's posture shifted slightly, a subtle tension easing when Nathan returned to the pups. Trust, Nathan realized, was not something Ronan extended broadly. It was situational, conditional, and right now, Nathan was inside the circle. The phone rang just after noon. Nathan stared at it for a moment before answering. He had not spoken to many people since retiring, and fewer still called without warning. "Cole," he said. "Nathan, it's Ruth," came the familiar gravel-edged voice. "You got company coming." Nathan's spine straightened. "What kind?" "The official kind," Ruth replied. "Animal control and a deputy. They were asking questions down at the feed store. Marcus Hale's name came up." That settled it. "Thank you," Nathan said, "for the warning." Ruth hesitated. "You didn't do anything wrong," she added, "but you should be ready." "I am," Nathan said, though he was not sure that was entirely true. Less than an hour later, a White County truck pulled into the drive, followed by a sheriff's cruiser. Ronan was on his feet before the engines cut, his body stiff, ears forward, the low growl starting deep in his chest. Nathan rested a hand lightly on the dog's shoulder, not to restrain, but to ground. "It's all right," he murmured. "Stay." Ronan stayed, though every muscle screamed readiness. Two people stepped out of the vehicles. The deputy was a man in his early 30s, tall and lean, with a sickle, close-cropped beard and tired eyes. His uniform was neat but worn, the creases softened by use rather than neglect. He moved carefully, the way men did when they knew a situation could tilt either way depending on how they spoke. His name tag read Deputy Aaron Mills. Beside him stood a woman in a thick county-issued jacket, clipboard tucked under one arm. She was in her 40s, her dark hair pulled back into a severe bun, her expression neutral to the point of opacity. Karen Whitlock, Animal Control, according to the patch on her sleeve. Her eyes moved constantly, cataloging details. Nathan stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind him. "Afternoon." "Mr. Cole," Deputy Mills said, nodding politely. "Mind if we talk?" "That depends," Nathan replied evenly. "About what?" Whitlock did not bother with pleasantries. We received a report of potentially stolen animals on this property, specifically a black German shepherd and her litter. Nathan felt the familiar tightening in his jaw. The female is deceased, he said. The pups are orphaned. The male is injured. Whitlock's pen paused. Cause of death? Respiratory illness compounded by stress and exposure, Nathan answered. She gave birth before she passed. Whitlock glanced at Mills, then back at Nathan. And the male? His name is Ronan, Nathan said. Whitlock's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Dogs don't name themselves. No, Nathan replied, but they earn names. Deputy Mills cleared his throat. Mr. Cole, a man named Marcus Hale, claims ownership of the animals, says they were taken from him without permission. Nathan met the deputy's gaze. Did he mention how they came to be injured? Mills's eyes flickered briefly. He said they ran off. Ronan growled, deeper this time. Nathan did not raise his voice. You're welcome to come inside and look at the wounds, both current and old. Whitlock considered. This then nodded. All right. Inside, the atmosphere shifted immediately. The warmth, the quiet, the small sounds of the pups created a stark contrast to the bureaucratic purpose that had arrived at the door. Ronan positioned himself between Whitlock and the pups, his body a solid barrier. Whitlock stopped short. I need to examine them. Nathan crouched beside Ronan. You can, he said, slowly, and from here. Whitlock knelt, maintaining distance, her eyes sharp. She took in Ronan's flank, the poorly healed scars along his neck, the way he held himself, alert, controlled, restrained by discipline rather than fear. Her expression changed, just slightly. These aren't fresh injuries, she said. No, Nathan replied. They're not. Whitlock moved her attention to the pups, watching them squirm and press together. They're healthy, she admitted, given the circumstances. Deputy Mills shifted his weight. Mr. Hale has prior complaints, he said carefully. Nothing that stuck, no convictions. Whitlock straightened. But there are patterns. She looked at Nathan. Do you intend to keep them? Yes, Nathan said without hesitation. Whitlock exhaled slowly. Then you'll need to file for temporary protective custody. Foster status. It won't be permanent until an investigation is completed. And if Marcus comes back? Nathan asked. Mills met his eyes. Call us. Nathan did not smile. I will. Whitlock scribbled on her clipboard, then tore off a form and handed it to Nathan. Fill this out. I'll push it through as fast as I can. She hesitated, then added quietly, For what it's worth, you're doing the right thing. Ronan watched them leave, his posture easing only when the vehicles disappeared down the road. Nathan closed the door and leaned against it, releasing a breath he had not realized he was holding. The lines had been drawn now, not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly. That evening, Nathan sat on the floor, with the pups nestled against his leg. Ronan stretched beside them. The house felt different again, not safer exactly, but defended. Purpose had a way of fortifying walls no one could see. Outside, the sun dipped low, painting the snow in long shadows. Somewhere beyond the trees, Marcus Hale was planning his next move. Inside, Nathan rested his hand on Ronan's shoulder. We're not alone, he said. Ronan did not look at him. He did not need to. The message had already been exchanged. Spring did not announce itself in Flagstaff. It arrived the way healing often did, quietly, unevenly, with setbacks that tested patience and resolve. Snow retreated in stubborn patches, clinging to shaded corners and north-facing slopes, while the rest of the land softened into brown earth and pale grass. The air still bit in the mornings, but by afternoon it carried the faint, unmistakable scent of thaw. Inside Nathan Cole's house, that change had already taken root. The pups were 6 weeks old now. They no longer fit easily in the shallow box Nathan had first lined with towels. Their legs had grown fast and clumsy, paws oversized and insistent, bodies wobbling with curiosity that outpaced coordination. The darkest of the three, broad-chested already, with Ronan's steady gaze, was the first to walk with purpose rather than accident. Nathan had taken to calling him Ash, for the way he lingered close to the hearth and watched everything burn down to its essentials. The pale one, smaller but quick, earned the name Luna, her movements light and unpredictable, her eyes always searching. The smallest, who had fought hardest in the beginning, had grown into a compact, stubborn presence Nathan called Beck, short for Beacon, because he always found his way back when the others wandered too far. Ronan watched them grow with a vigilance that had softened but never disappeared. His wound had healed into a thick scar along his flank, the fur there lighter, permanently altered. He moved freely now, strength returning to his frame, but he never strayed far from the pups or from Nathan. The line between guard and companion blurred slowly, earned inch by inch through shared routines. Feeding, cleaning, walking the perimeter together at dusk. Nathan had not expected how much structure the dogs would bring back into his life. Mornings began early again, not with alarms, but with eager paws and thin barks that demanded attention. He found himself laughing once, surprised, by the sound, rusty but real, when Ash tumbled headfirst into a water bowl and emerged indignant and soaked. He caught himself talking aloud, narrating tasks the way he once had when his son was small. The house responded, filling with noise and movement where silence had once settled like dust. Marcus Hale returned only once. It was late afternoon when Nathan spotted the familiar truck idling at the edge of the road, just beyond the property line this time. Marcus did not get out. He sat behind the wheel, watching the house, the yard, the movement of dogs through the window. Ronan stood beside Nathan on the porch, body relaxed but alert, his presence unmistakable. A sheriff's cruiser rolled past minutes later, slow and deliberate. The truck left. Nathan never heard from Marcus again. Ruth later confirmed what Nathan suspected. An investigation had finally caught up with patterns too obvious to ignore. Kennels shut down, charges pending. The kind of ending that came not with drama, but with inevitability. With the threat gone, the house exhaled. Ruth visited often, sometimes with supplies, sometimes just with commentary, and a thermos of strong coffee. She watched the pups wrestle in the yard one afternoon, her lined face softening. "There'll be something," she said. "All three of them." Nathan nodded. "They already are." Paperwork followed, then more paperwork. Temporary custody became permanent. Ronan's name was written down, official now, no longer claimed by anyone who saw him as property. Nathan framed the final document without irony and hung it near the door, a quiet declaration of belonging. On a mild April morning, Nathan loaded the dogs into the truck for their first trip beyond the property together. Ronan hopped in without hesitation, settling in the back with practiced ease. The pups followed, clambering over one another, noses pressed to windows, overwhelmed by the rush of new smells. They drove into town, past places Nathan had avoided for years, and nothing terrible happened. The world did not collapse. It simply expanded. That afternoon, Nathan stood in the backyard. Working on a low fence meant less to keep the dogs in than to mark a boundary they all understood. Ronan lay nearby, eyes half closed, listening to the rhythm of hammer and nail. The pups chased one another in uneven circles, their yips cutting through the warm air. Nathan paused, leaning on the fence post, and looked at the house. It no longer felt like a place he waited to leave. It felt like something he was building again. He thought of Alara then, not with the sharp ache of loss, but with a steadier gratitude. She had brought them here, all of them. Through storm and sickness and sacrifice, she had chosen this place, this man, this future for her children. Nathan understood now that some choices were not about survival. They were about trust. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the yard, Ronan rose and walked to Nathan. He stopped close, pressed his shoulder briefly against Nathan's leg. A deliberate, grounded touch, not a demand, not a plea, a statement. Nathan rested his hand on Ronan's head, fingers sinking into thick fur. "You did good," he said. "All of you did." The pups barreled into them moments later, collapsing the quiet into chaos, tails wagging, mouths open, alive in every possible sense of the word. Nathan laughed in again, unguarded this time, and let himself be pulled into the mess of it. The house had not been saved from loss. It had learned how to live with it, and in doing so, it had chosen life anyway. Sometimes, God does not arrive with thunder or fire. Sometimes, his miracles come quietly, in the form of a door opened on a frozen night, a wounded heart choosing compassion one more time, or a life given so that others may live. Alara's story reminds us of a truth we often forget, that love does not always survive, but it is never wasted. In our own lives, we all face winters, seasons of loss, loneliness, fear, or exhaustion. Moments when we feel forgotten, unseen, or too tired to keep going. And yet, again and again, God places small miracles in our path. A person who stays, a hand that reaches out, a reason to rise tomorrow. Nathan thought he was rescuing a family that night. but in God's quiet design, they were sent to rescue him. If you are watching this today and carrying pain in your heart, know this: you are not alone. God sees you. And even now, he may be preparing a second chance, one you don't yet recognize as a blessing. If this story touched you, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We would love to pray for you. And if you believe that love, kindness, and faith still matter in this world, please subscribe to our channel so we can continue sharing stories that heal. Before we go, let us say a short prayer together. Dear Lord, I ask that you bless everyone listening right now. Protect them from fear, comfort them in sorrow, and remind them that no heart is ever truly forgotten. Guide them through their storms, and lead them gently toward peace, purpose, and love. Amen. Thank you for being here. God bless you. And we'll see you in the next story.